Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey everyone.
And we are going to be continuing our sub series on elements in Genshin Impact. And this week we are discussing Electro. So, Dave, really quickly before I jump into the data and so forth, I'm going to surprise toss the ball over to you. What are your general thoughts about Electro before I dig in?
Yeah, so for Electro, for me, as far as the element goes, I mean, everybody jokes with Electro because it's like, oh man, I got Kaching off the standard banner. It's like, oh, some of us are more fortunate getting her than others, or unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it. But I like the concept of Electro. So there are a few characters that like stand out in the Electro element to me. So like I said, with Kaching there, if we're going all the way back, to 1.0. And then through the different regions, getting Aimiko, getting Raiden Shogun, and then all the way up here most recently for me was Clorind. So there's always going to be some standout characters to me in terms of the personal journey, and so that's what I'll always tie it back to, and kind of what makes going through these elements fun is because we've talked about popular characters and their usage rates and things like that, but it also kind of reminds me of, well, which characters were I using? And so like for me, our pirate captain Beta, she was really, before I had any 5 stars,
Hmm.
she was who I first was using kind of in that first, adventurer rank, to get through Mondstadt. Um, so a little bit of nostalgia there, but and then most recently up to where I'm using Miko in some teams, and then also now, of course, trying to work in Clorind. But that's kind of just my own brief personal history with Electro. But what about you, Steve? Any nostalgic characters or things that maybe we won't focus too much on in the usage rates, but you still want to give them their due?
Um, I'm gonna be honest, no, not really. As far as Electro goes, Yaimiko was really the first character that I went very far into. I mean, Raiden Shogun, I guess as well, but Raiden was more of a. I don't 100% consider her an Electro character, and I'll explain that once I get a little bit further in. Electro or Raiden didn't quite play the way that she does now, and so she didn't do as well as embodying the Electro element, I feel, from a DPS standpoint. But I'm going to jump right into some of the statistics and general overview of Electro. So there are about 15 total characters that are Electro Element in Genshin Impact. About 4 of those are some form of support character. They aren't a main DPS or sub DPS in some way, shape, or form. Um, in general, the element seems to be focused a lot on energy recharge with things like its resonance, which gives you additional energy, um, high ultimate high ultimate costs. They tend to have high energy requirements for their ultimates. And then from a damage point of view, they seem to be more focused on consistent damage, which is here kind of loosely defined as lots of little hits over one big hit. And you can see that in their elemental reactions, as well as, again, kind of excluding one big outlier here. Most of the DPS characters in Electro are lots of little damaging hits or multiple damaging hits instead of a big one-shot ultimate. In the way that like Hu Tao's ultimate is a big one-shot of damage, most of the other ones have that damage split up into multiple hits instead. Again, Kaching being a good example here of multiple hits on her ult. Again, Raiden kind of plays into both of those to a degree. Again, I don't her ultimate is sort of the big outlier on that one, but her skill, records energy generation of the team, does lots of small additional hits, so on and so forth. So as with her as sort of a embodiment of the element, she plays into sort of that idea of lots of little hits focused around energy recharge. And then of course she has her big ultimate for lots of damage that is, trying to reward that, but not doesn't quite blend in with the rest of the team. Um, So again, Dave, do you have any thoughts regarding that before we get into hard usage data?
No, let's dive into the hard usage data. Let's hear what you got for us this week.
Okay. So as far as the numbers go, the honest answer is that in 1.0, Taser's basically the only team that really saw Abyss usage. So that was primarily built around Beto, and then you would use Sucrose, Child, and some other Hydro character, basically, in order to cause lots of electro-charged hits, which is the reaction between Hydro and Electro, which scales out exponentially, because the more enemies you have, the more damage it does. As the Abyss moved to a more single target, you saw Taser drop off in usage, and instead, really nothing was there until Raiden came out. With the release of Raiden, you then saw a massive jump up in her usage, obviously, and she floated around the 80 to 70% mark through most of 1.0 into 2.0, or sorry, 2.0, because she wasn't in 1.0. So most of 2.0, that's sort of where she sat. Starting with 3.0, I have better numbers that are actually broken down by Abyss instead of more general usage. So starting with 3.0, which is Sumeru for those that are curious, Raiden was the most popular character at a little over 75%. So I don't have hard number. I'm looking at a chart here, so I don't have the exact breakdown. But a little bit over 75% was Raiden. She jumped up with Dendro and the availability of those units. And over the course of 3.0 into 4.0, she actually dropped off quite a bit. She's actually now, or as of the end of 4.0, she was down to about 35-40% usage. She really kind of, I don't want to say fell off a cliff. She wasn't as bad as some other characters on here, but she has definitely tapered off and dropped off in usability. So that's Raiden. In comparison, Kaching, who is sort of I put Razor onto the chart just to see if there was any interesting blips there. There was not. He's at 0 usage rate. Like he doesn't appear here at all. But Kaching does, and she's as sort of the floor of DPSs, sitting somewhere between 5 to 15% usage rate through most of the patches. I suspect that that's partly because of Kaching mains and so forth, who have her at C6 and use her for that. I do also want to note that she did see a jump up in Abyss 3.1.3, which I believe would have been just after Nahida or another Dendro would have dropped, which makes her aggravate build much more usable and semi-meta. So I can see that would be why she kind of has a little bit more usage during the beginning part of 3.0 or 3.x, and then she's kind of just floating for the most of the rest up until 5.0. Again, I'll take a quick pause before I jump into other characters.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned Raiden spiking around in the mid 70s in terms of usage rate. Because we talked last week, about what was popular, and there were, I think you said there were just 2 units that touched on 90%, or did you say 2 units just touched on 80%?
No, 2 or 90, which was
only 2 or 90, which was Kazuha, that you mentioned, and so it was interesting that Raiden, for as popular she was as anticipated of a unit as she was when she was originally coming out, because there was all the hype around her just because of the aesthetics of her, and then you throw in the fact that she's an Archon, and as the old Steve logic goes, they don't make bad Archons. And I mean, she was breaking sales records in terms of people pulling for her. So for her to get up to the mid 70s, not even breach into 80% in terms of usage rate is interesting to me.
Well, and I do think that it's important to note that this is a small subset. This data comes from I Win to Lose. It's not, this is not perfect. This is self-reported by people.
Oh,
And,
fair enough.
and the other half I would say is 75% means that 3 out of every 4 people out of the 2 teams that they had, they were running Raiden in some way, shape, or form. That's a big number. Because
Yes.
I would say anything above 50% is definitively a top class meta character. Anything above 25% is a character that's very solid. Being in the lower percentile is not necessarily bad because not everybody pulls everything. Again, Raiden is kind of an outlier. Same with Hu Tao, but yeah, I guess just kind of a little bit of pushback. That 75% is real good.
Yeah, no, no. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
it's not real good. No, no. I'm just saying that her being the most popular character, or at the time of launch, like it felt like the hype for her was extremely high. So for her to not even hit the 80 percentile threshold, when characters that were less hyped and less people were less excited for, I would say, did get into like that 90 percentile or whatever have you. So, like I said, for her to be where she was, again, I'm not saying that 75% is not a high usage rate. I understand that's a high usage rate. I'm saying I would have expected it to be higher considering how hyped of a character people were for her.
Yeah, and again, to be somewhat also fair, this is about one. I mean, this is 3.0 instead of 2.0 is where we've got the I win to lose data picking up. So there's been a full cycle, a full region for other characters to kind of work their way in. I suspect, and again, I don't have the data for this, so I do apologize. I suspect on release in 3. I think she was 3.1 or 3.2. She probably was hitting 85, 90, just because she was the first C2 R1 character that a lot of people were going for. There was a lot of hoopla around getting her to C2 and getting her weapon. I remember. So I wouldn't be shocked if her usage rates were that high, like on the patch she came out.
Mhm.
But just as time has gone on, I think that she dropped off, unfortunately.
Yeah, and to talk about Raiden, so I do want to kind of just very quickly, because this is on top of the usage rates, we want to talk about kind of the builds and how she was built and how to do that. So for Raiden, we talked a little bit about well, we talked about it a little bit last week when we were talking about Pyro, because that's the element we talked about. We talked about the national team and her being a part of that national team. So that would be, I think, one of her main, when she's the main DPS. That's that build, and then the other build for her where she's kind of a main DPS. It was her, Kazuha, Bennett, and Kujo Sara, who was an interesting 4-star unit that came along there while we were in that region. But for her build, and again, for this series, we're going to assume that signature weapon is obviously the best weapon for her. But if you don't have those, you do have some other options available to you for Raiden Shogun, which you would have the Wavebreaker's Fin and the Catch kind of being the next best options for her. I mean, I guess, technically, if you have the Staff of Homa, maybe you can make an argument for that. But again, that's a premium banner weapon, that we're trying to pull for. And so I'm looking at this from a free-to-play perspective, / if you're trying to get battle passes, I'll mention those as well. But in terms of her weapons, I remember when the Catch came out and how ridiculous that that was to kind of try and get with all the fishing mini games, right? Which was super fun. But that would be a good option for her as a free-to-play that is technically, grindable via the free-to-play. And then as far as like her artifact set in that DPS build, I mean, you're looking at the Emblem of Severed Fate, and then across the stats and substats, for the Sands, you're doing energy recharge percentage or attack. Goblet, you're looking at attack percentage or electro damage. Sharklet, crit rate or crit damage. So a very standard DPS build for her. And then, of course, you're prioritizing crit damage, crit rate, attack, energy recharge, and then a little bit of elemental mastery there for those substats. So that would be her kind of as the main DPS build. And then there is also kind of a sub DPS build for her, where she's, not necessarily the main one on the field, and a lot of those revolve around. And we talk about the evolution of characters with the introduction of the Dendro element. So these are going to be more hyper balloon teams that are going to involve her, going to involve Nahida and Alhaitham. Or if you don't have Alhaitham, you can throw in Baizu, and then you have Yelan or another Hydro applier in there for the team for that 4th slot as well. And in this particular build, you're just pure elemental mastery. Like everything you're going for is elemental mastery in this build. You're running Flower of Paradise Lost, or you're running the Gilded Dreams artifact set. You're running the best option for her in this instance is Dragon's Bane, which is a free-to-play option. And then, again, your main stats are literally Elemental Mastery on the Sands Goblet Circlet, and you're prioritizing Elemental Mastery and Energy Recharge on substats if you can't get it on those main stats, or there are pieces that you can't get Elemental Mastery on the main stats. So those are kind of the main... Those are the sub DPS, and I noticed with her sub DPS, it's a lot of the hyper bloom. So we talk about the evolution of characters, and that's an interesting one to have seen come about once Sumeru existed.
Yeah, and I do think that it's worth taking a detour here real quick, because we've mentioned the evolution and how Dendro kind of changed Raiden, but it changed the way the Electro Element in general was both perceived and kind of works. Where pre-Dendro, there was a lot of scorn, I think, in the Genshin theory crafting community towards Electro as a element, that it really didn't have any great reactions, that it was kind of meh in general, and that just the damage potential wasn't there. That, the way that characters were built through up till some was very much so on, it's not transformative reactions, it's the opposite. It's the other one. Multiplicative, I think is the term for it. I might be wrong on that. But things like Vaporize and Melt, which are, they take the damage that a hit would do and then applies a multiplier to it. Reactions instead do damage scaling based off of Elemental Mastery and scale linearly with damage, but exponentially with number of hits, basically. So the more hits and the more instances you do of it, you get much more bang for your buck versus just doing a single hit for that amount of damage, if that makes sense. So with the introduction of Dendro, that kind of changed for Electro, that they got transformative reactions in the form of Hyper Bloom, in the form of Aggravate, and I forget what the Dendro to Electro version of Aggravate is. It's doesn't matter. I'll remember it by the time we get to Dendro. But yeah, so Dendro really, I think, changed a lot of perception around Electro. It also brought life into characters like Yaemiko, who will be the character that we'll talk about next, because going into 3.0, her usage rate was a little bit over 25%. She was 26, 27%. After Nahida came out, her usage rate jumped to over 50%. Now, part of that might be that people didn't have her, because I believe she had a banner rerun somewhere during that time period. But regardless, her usage rate climbed quite a bit post Nahida dropping, and she floated between roughly 25% and 50%, so 40-ish percent, I'll say. You'll occasionally jump up to near 50 and then drop down to about 25. That one's probably based more off of Abyss blessings more so than anything else. But sorry, I know that I've been going on for a little bit, so I'll pass it back to you, Dave.
No, you're good. I was going to let you go because as soon as you mentioned we're going to talk about Yaemiko, I was like, oh god, I'm going to wax poetic about her because I love Yaemiko. She was one of my favorite characters. If you guys heard our top 5 character episode where we ranked our favorites and also our least favorites, Yaemiko was in that discussion for me. So without trying to go too long into Yaemiko, yeah, I definitely was excited. I missed her on her first go, got her on her rerun that you mentioned there when that occurred. And for Yaimiko, um, great, great sub DPS unit. As far as like her build, there's a couple different ways that you can go with that. You have your general Electro sub DPS build, and you talked about some Taser builds in the past. There's also an Overload team comp for her, and then similarly with the introduction of Dendro, we then see the Aggravate team that came to be. And so we'll kind of break down those because there's slightly different builds for them. So starting with just kind of general Electro sub DPS, if you're going Taser or Overload, you're going to be running the Golden Troop artifact set. You're going to run Elemental Mastery or Attack on your Sands. You're going to run Electro damage on your Goblet. Circle it again, crit rate or crit damage. And substats, of course, prioritizing those. For your weapons, for the free-to-plays, in terms of 4-star weapons, the Wit Sith or Sacrificial Jade are going to be your weapons of choice. If you do lose 50-50 on the standard banner, or I guess if you're hoping for a character and lose and therefore get a weapon, you do have some options from the standard banner. You have Skyward Atlas and the Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds, which I believe are both from the standard banner options in terms of that. So you don't have to wade into the weapon banner as a free-to-play. You'll just hit one of those potentially over your standard banner pulls. So that is, again, for the kind of the Taser or team or the Overload team, which I know you talked about Taser team, so just to hit it real quickly, is be something like an example team will be like her, Child, Fischl, and Sucrose. Or an Overload team would be somebody like Yaimiko, Raiden Shogun, Bennett, and Chevreuse here, who just came out with Fontaine, right? And then we have the Dendro builds with an Aggravate team. And so this build is slightly different in terms of your artifact set. You're actually going to be looking at the Gilded Dreams artifact set. But in terms of weapons, you are going to be looking at the same alternative options to her signature weapon. The only other weapon that also might be good would be actually Nahida's signature weapon on her. But again, that is from a weapon banner. But still worth noting in case you have Nahida's weapon and not Yaimiko's. That'd be a good substitute for a weapon on the Aggravate team. But that, of course, assumes you're not then also running Nahida on the Aggravate team. So just be aware of a lot of Catalyst users on some of these teams, and you don't want to assume you have Catalysts when you're using them on other characters in the team, right? But an example team for Aggravate would be like Fischl, Yaimiko, Nahida, and Alhaitham. Or you could use Tainari and Nahida, something like that. Would be a good Aggravate team.
And sort of the last character I've included on this, the data that I gathered is Fischl. I realized after the fact that Cyno is a Electro DPS. I just forgot about him. So anyone out there who is a Cyno fan, my apologies. Feel free to yell at me in the comments. That was my bad. I just completely forgot about the man. His puns just knocked him out of my memory. So the last that we've got is Fischl. Primarily, I include her sort of for the same reason as Bennett, that she's considered one of the premier 4-star characters. And the term is escaping me now. She's one of the 1.0 4-star characters that have kind of had legs and been able to last into later regions, later cycles. But unlike Bennett or Guoba, her usage rate really taps out at 20%. She is much more niche than those two, and used far less. I think part of that is I do think a lot of that is just because Electro didn't have the same hype around it as what Pyro had. So it took a long time for her to get her team. Like, she had Taser, but that was really it. And it wasn't again until Sumeru came out that you really started seeing Electro's stock on the rise. So in general, I think just a lot of people didn't have relics, farmed up for them the same way that I'm sure a lot of people spent way too much time in the Crimson Witch domain getting relics for all the pyro characters that they have. So you had lots of spare. Yeah. So you have lots of spares of those. So you've got all your pyros reliced out, but none of your electros are good to go. Similar issues there. I think that part of it is just momentum wasn't behind her as a character. I also wouldn't necessarily be shocked that, pun. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if part of the reason why just maybe some people don't find her character as interesting. I know that she can be a little bit off-putting as sort of the
Oh, in terms of just her personality as a
just
character.
her personality as a character. Doesn't quite bother me, but I have heard complaints from others before in regards to that.
I'd almost argue that you got to, attribute the 4-star factor to usage rate too, in that there are some people that are like, oh, she's not a 5-star character, and they don't, maybe they're not, maybe it's a more casual fan who's not, trying to min-max or not looking up guys and just kind of playing characters they like, and their experience with gachas are SSR and 5-star characters are the best ones, and therefore they're not going to even really look or build 4-star characters.
The only reason
I think that could be a factor.
I agree. The only thing I guess I'm more drawing the comparison to Bennett and the other sort of 1.0 superstar characters that Bennett was sitting at sat at 90% usage rate. Official is nowhere near that. Guoba was sitting near in the 80s for a long time. Official's nowhere near that. So
fair counterpoint.
Of the those original 5 characters, I think 5 4 stars. We haven't gotten to Hydro and we haven't gotten to Animo yet, but I'm willing to bet she's in the bottom 2 of those as far as usage goes.
Well, and I think too with and you may have a countering point or maybe some data to immediately prove me wrong with what I'm about to say, but I think a part of it too with Fischl was she's very reliant on her constellations, in that getting her to C6 really is going to maximize her damage. And you think, oh, well, Dave, any character gets to C6 can maximize their damage. But I think more so, but there are definitely characters that rely more on their constellations in terms of a power boost than others. And I think Fischl is one of those characters that is like, if you're not, like,
the problem of you need Constellation 4.
Yeah, there's like a certain breakpoint. For her, unfortunately, it's 6. And so if you've been unfortunate to not get her to C6, you haven't really fully unlocked that potential and maximized that output. And, because there's no guarantees for 4-star characters. And it's just the longevity of playing the game. You would eventually hit her, and maybe you've hit her by now. But for those that are newer or fresher playing, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't have that information. That is a good point.
That's just my gut feeling in terms of how it came across and what I remembered from back when she was more relevant.
Yeah, and I do think, again, I think part of this is legacy, that Bennett has a history of Bennett is so powerful. People know Bennett's really powerful. So when you have the opportunity to pull on banners that Bennett's on, it's considered I'm getting an opportunity to get those constellations for Bennett, even if the character that's, you pull for the 5-star, but, having Bennett on the banner is considered a win. Versus...
Yeah, unless you're somebody who's pulling for Kokomi, but then you end up... Or pulling on the Kokomi banner, but then you end up getting Kokomi, right?
I mean, look, that'll be next week. We'll talk about that next week. We're going to...
We'll share that story more in depth next week. But, so to bring it back to Fischl real quick, so just to kind of discuss her and her build very quickly to break down. So we've mentioned, again, the Taser team. Another sample team, actually, uniquely enough, would be a superconduct team. So that's, a team that we don't see as often so much anymore. I think that's more speaking towards Cryo's place in the game and its game state, not necessarily Electro. But
I think we're talking about like one character, unfortunately. But yeah,
but we'll talk about Cryo in the future. But in terms of Electro for Fischl's build, I mean, you can run her as being the main DPS or the sub DPS, depending on kind of what play style you like or which character you like to have out on the field. But as a sub DPS build, for an Electro type build, you're running, again, free to play options would be something like the Stringless. Skyward Harp, I believe, is the 5-star that's from the standard banner, if I'm not mistaken. And then technically you have Polar Star and Aqua Simulacra, which was Yelan's signature bow, if you're going the premium route. But for free to plays, you're probably going to be looking at the Stringless. It's the most realistic option. The best artifact set for it would be that Golden Trope artifact set, running attack percentage or an elemental mastery on the sands, electro damage on the goblet, and then standard circlet would be crit rate or crit damage, prioritizing on the substats crit rate, crit damage, and attack percentage. Right. So a sample taser team, we've talked about that. I won't rehash that one. But for a superconduct team, be looking at somebody like Fischl, Baidu, Eula, soft spot for Eula, and then like Diona, something like that would be your superconduct teams. And then if you want to try something completely different, there is a physical DPS build.
Machine gun Fischl, yeah.
Yeah, so we want to talk about Fischl with a physical DPS build, slightly different build. So you're going to be looking at your most realistic free-to-play option would be Rust. Best in slot is still Polar Star, similar to what it was with the other build. But again, for free-to-play, most realistic, you're looking at Rust or potentially the Skyward Harp in that regards. You are going to be looking at the Pale Flame artifact set as opposed to the Golden Troop artifact set for Electro. So Pale Flame for physical, with Sands being attack, Goblet being the physical damage bonus, and again, Circlet crit rate, crit damage. Substats being the same, except for you would add in Elemental Mastery here is acceptable as well. And then, teams would ultimately be the same. You're just building her in a way where you're focused more on the white damage as opposed to the purple damage for that. So physical, as somebody who grinded a lot of Leela and a lot of the start of Incoin, or a lot of like the Inkoinoimia section of the game, as somebody who grinded that out a lot with Eula and Raiden in a physical damage team, it's not as fun as elemental reactions. That's part of the fun of the game, but there were definitely some big numbers. It's just not my cup of tea, but just always want to put it out there because different strokes for different folks, I suppose.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the way that that Fischl's version of it works is that you're focused on basically auto attacks because she gets increased attack speed, I believe. Like she gets scaling attack speed based off of the crow and so on and so forth. So that the idea is that you do a ton of little hits with her bow.
Yeah, and that's why you would put Rust on her, because Rust increases that normal damage by 40%, and then it decreases the charge attack damage by 10%. And then its bonus effect is attack percentage. So you're just like you said, machine gunning out those little hits, but they add up because you're stacking so much attack and getting that buff from the bow.
Yeah. Sorry, just to explain for people who might never have heard of that particular build and how it functions. I know we're going to talk about Eula in the future, but Eula is very much so a one big hit versus the official style. But yeah, that's basically the data side of Electro. Any closing thoughts or further thoughts, Dave?
Well, I do want to just discuss, because I know we don't have as much data on her, but I do want to mention Clorind.
Okay, well, I have a single data point for her, which was her abilities. Yeah.
So if you want to go ahead and share what's the initial data and the very small subset say on her stats.
So at least her Abyss usage, the first chance that she was available for it was about 45%. Would be eyeballing it where she is at.
Okay, so not a bad start to her usage in Genshin. Clorind was a character for me. I loved the aesthetic as soon as we saw her in the first cutscene. I thought the pistol and cutlass hybrid type stuff was fantastic. And so having built her and played her, there's some similarities in terms of even like the animation styles and stuff to like Kaching in terms of like blinking and flashing around the map type stuff. But in terms of her build, you're looking at an Electro DPS build, which is going to be pretty standard, and then just she has the Bond of Life gimmicks essentially, which was introduced once we came into Fontaine. But for her build, you're going to be looking at kind of the best free-to-play options would be the Black Sword or Finale of the Deep. The Black Sword, if I'm not mistaken, is the Battle Pass weapon, I believe.
I
Or
think
am I confusing
it
that with?
is. I don't know if it's that or if it's the one that you get using.
No, it is. It is the
It
Battle
is
Pass one.
okay.
That's right, because I did the Battle Pass one time at the very beginning, back during Ganyu's rerun. That's right, and that was a weapon. That was a choice. That's right. But if you haven't ever bought the Battle Pass or you don't buy the Battle Pass and you are pure free to play, then you're going to be looking at, I believe, the next best option for her would be the Finale of the Deep. Would be the next best option, and I'm trying to confirm because I believe is that one not craftable or was that maybe an event sword? No, it was craftable in Fontaine. That's right. Yeah, so those are going to be kind of the best semi free to play, and then ultimately free to play options with Finale of the Deep. It's just craftable. If you have pulled for some 5-star weapons, perhaps you have the Primordial Jade Cutter would be a third best option behind her signature weapon, and then the second best option technically would be I'm going to mispronounce this, the Heron Kapaku Futsu. Yeah, that's what I'll go with. Sure, yep. I gave the old college try. But yeah, as far as the actual build itself, though, to dive into that and not get caught up on pronunciation and semantics. The best artifact set for Clorinde is going to be the Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, or you can also do Thundering Fury. Each one of those is acceptable, similar to what we talked about. You may have a bunch of Thundering Fury left over from running some domains in the past, which may be a good full set, perfectly acceptable. If not, Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, you can get to grinding that. And then as far as the main stats, again, pretty much a standard DPS build. So Sands being attack percentage or elemental mastery, Goblet electro damage, Circlet crit rate or crit damage, focusing crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and attack on the substats. And then some sample teams here. If you are playing her in an aggravate team, you'd be looking at her, Fischl, Nahida, Kazuha type thing. If you're looking at her in an overload build, you can look at to her, Fischl, Chevreuse, and like Toma would be maybe an example team in that regards. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on Clorinde. I knew we didn't have too much data, but still worth mentioning because I thought she looked cool, so she's gonna get an honorable mention here.
You know what?
So I know dad jokes couldn't cut it, but Clorinde, I'll allow it.
You know what? That's fine. I didn't end up pulling for it because I already had my C6 Kaching, and so it's I can't go any deeper into that particular play style. Like I got the best I'm gonna get as far as that goes.
Well, for Ching, I mean, since you do mention her, and she could be somebody, a character like you that somebody maybe has a C6 of, and is like, man, I got this 5-star C6. Let's build a team around her. So I do want to at least touch on her just very briefly.
Okay.
'Cause I think it's worth mentioning. She's been in the game since 1.0, and like I mentioned, maybe somebody's gotten lucky, or depending on how you want to look at it, unlucky, and they have her at C6. Or maybe they just really like her, and maybe they even purchased her outfit, which also looks awesome. But anyway, to keep this quick, so aggravate main DPS build would be kind of the way to go on this. And you're looking at, again, best free to play options would be the Battle Pass Black Sword, or if you're true free to play, why do they do this to me? The Aminoma Kaguchi.
Okay, I'll believe
which
it.
is you acquire that the Aminoma Kaguchi weapon. You get that from the World Quest. So it is recommended to do that, but that would technically be the best free to play option for her. Or if you have the Primordial Jade Cutter, that would be a 5-star weapon. That is an option if you don't have the Mist Splitter Reforged, which is Mist Splitter Reforged, isn't that? Was that Raiden's?
No, that's Ayaka's. It's the one that
Ayaka's.
it's the one I wanted, and we
That's right.
And
I knew there was a reason.
yeah.
I knew there was a reason that name sounded familiar. But anyway, as far as her build, Thundering Fury, again, best artifact set, just the typical Thunder artifact set for her. And then, again, standard DPS build, attack percentage, elemental mastery on the sands, goblet, electro damage, crit damage on the circlet. And then, again, prioritizing crit damage, attack percentage, and elemental mastery for your substats. Your aggravate team will look something like her official Hida or something like her Kazuha, maybe you have Kuki Shinobi, and then Kole if you haven't pulled for maybe some of the 5-star Dendro users. You had Kole given to you as a free option when we were introduced into Sumeru. So just briefly wanted to talk about her. If you're going with Kaching in a non-aggravate main DPS build, you do have some other options. You have some Electro Charge team comps. Similar builds in terms of weapons, slight differentiation on your artifact set. You're not going to go with the 4-piece Thundering Fury. You're going to go 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece Gladiator's Finale, so slightly different. Sands will be attack percentage in this instance. Then you have Goblet for electro damage, crit damage on the circlet, and then substats still prioritizing the same as before. And for like the Electro Charge build, it'd be something like, her official Yelan, Kazuha, something like that. And then there is also a kind of a mono Electro build, so her, Baidu, Kaching, and then Kokomi, like for your healer type, and also for maybe a little bit of elemental reactions. But that's Kaching, so just wanted to give her a little love, one of the OGs that maybe somebody has at C6.
Yeah. All right.
But that's all I got for this. And so I think do we have some events going on? I think maybe to talk about. I know we have a new character to talk about. But Steve, did you have any last thoughts on the Electro Element?
It's definitely one that has hyper bloomed with the release of Dendro, and I know I said I didn't really have any major thoughts at the very beginning, but I do think that a lot of my fondness for Electro comes from Dendro in a lot of ways. So, I like Yaimiko. She's an amazing character, but I like Yaimiko. I don't necessarily like Electro as an element, if that makes sense. I'm not looking to pick up many more. Let's put it that way.
All right. Well, that's fair enough. Well, Steve, let's go ahead and keep it with you because I know we have some events going on in Star Rail to discuss quickly, and then again a character review. So I'll just throw it back to you for events.
So as far as events go, we only really have one this week, which is the Honkai Star Rail event in Scrolled. Oh boy, that's a word. Crepusculum? Sure, we'll go with that. And it's a combat event. Basically, you can play with your own team, or you can use the team that's given, and they're built around different themes, and you're trying to basically complete mini-game goals or combat goals in the first half, and then based on your score in the first half, you then go into a boss fight, which you can then complete. So, you might need to run a break team for one, and they'll give you the units for a break team if you need it. You might need to run a follow-up attack team in another. Try that. I know that one of the later events is Aglaia, who we'll be talking about in a little bit. They give you her team, so you can kind of experience her on her premium team. But it's fun. I found it fairly straightforward. I've been able to basically complete all of them with max score so far. So it's not, I would say, overly difficult in that regard. Especially with the teams that they provide, you're able to at least get, the A, S rank scores. You're able to get all the rewards with those. But yeah, that is the event, and I'll pass it back over to you, Dave, for Aglaia's full review.
Yeah, so to do a rundown on Aglaia, we're looking at her as she's of the lightning element in the path of remembrance. And for her build, and I'm not going to get deep into her kit and specifics on that, right? But in terms of her build, obviously the signature weapon is going to be the best option if you're able to pull for her light cone. If not, then you're going to be the best free to play option would be Sweat Now, Cry Less, which you get from the Nameless Glory, which that's the Battle Pass option,
That's
I
the
guess,
Battle
right?
Pass option. Yep.
Yeah, so not free to play per se, but there's that. And then as far as the true free to play option, you're actually looking at a 3-star light cone right now. Reminiscence being the best option there, and then Genius's Greetings, which is you get from an event warp as well. So you'd have to do it from the banner. So Remembrance being a new light cone, there aren't that many out there right now.
Yeah.
So I expect this list to be updated as more things in the Remembrance field come. But that being said, there isn't a huge variation in terms of like damage output between any of these. Like if with the exception being her signature light cone, or her signature light cone is about 120% versus Sweat Now, Cry Less, if you have it superimposed one time, is 100%. But then Sweat Now, Cry Less superimposed to the max is 108 or 109, we'll say. So again, the signature light cone does have a big jump. That's about 20% versus the standard, numbers. Reminiscence, the 3-star light cone is 100.9% damage output. So, and Genius's Greetings is 97.82. So essentially 98%. So not a huge variance and of those free to play or almost free to play options. But if you can get the signature light cone, that is a bigger step up there, but not required per se. As far as the best relic set option for her, you're going to be looking at kind of the, what a shocker, a newer set that just came out, right? We got a new path, we got a new character, and a new set. Who knew? But the best option for her in that regard is going to be the Hero of the Triumphant Song. This is going to be the new set that's meant to help support the Remembrance and their memo sprites. So this set, for those that are unaware, it's going to increase her attack by 12%. The 2-piece set, the 4-piece set is going to boost. So I'll just read it as it's worded. While the wearer's memo sprite is on the field, increases the wearer's speed by 6%. When the wearer's memo sprite attacks, increases the wearer's and memo sprite's crit damage by 30% for 2 turns. So essentially, as long as the Galea has her summon out, the 4-piece set will give her a 6% bonus. And when that memo sprite attacks, it will give the memo sprite as well as the Galea 30% crit damage boost for 2 turns. So that's going to be the best option for her if you don't have that farmed or are in the process of farming it. Other options are going to be kind of a flex option. Some combination of the Scholar of Lost and Erudition 2-piece, which gives an increased crit rate, and then 2-piece of either maybe the Band of Sizzling Thunder, Musketeer of Wild Wheat, Prisoner of Deep Confinement, something like that, which their 2-piece sets are plus 12% attack, except for Band of Sizzling Thunder explicitly is plus 10% on your lightning damage. So that's going to be the recommended if you are mixing and matching. But again, this is just all while you farm the Hero of Triumphant Song, because the number difference, if we're saying Hero of Triumphant Song is 100%, those others are going to be a little bit under 95%. So it's about a 5% dip if you haven't farmed for Hero of Triumphant Song yet. For her planetary sets, another shocker, newer planetary set for a newer unit and a newer path. But the best option for her planetary set is going to be the Wondrous Banana Amusement Park. This 2-piece set increases the crit damage by 16%, and when the target summoned by the wearer is on the field, crit damage is increased by another 32%. So you're going to be getting a lot of crit damage through that planetary set and through the Hero of Triumphant Song. So those are the best options for her. If you don't have the Banana Amusement Park set for her, other options would include the Rudolent Arena and Glamoth. Those are only about a 2% fall off when compared to a Banana Amusement Park. So not a huge drop off like there is with the Artifact set, but still serviceable if you have those from farming for previous units that we've had in other patches. Best stats, going to be your standard typical DPS build. Body, you're going to be looking at crit rate or crit damage. So obviously with getting so much crit damage through artifacts and bonuses and things like that. Maybe you want to get that crit rate over crit damage on the body. It just kind of depends on what your substats look like, and also what your specific team comp looks like. So you can get that crit rate and maximize that while getting all that sweet crit damage. For the feat, attack percentage or speed, just depending on what threshold you're trying to hit in terms of the speed. For the planar sphere, you're looking at lightning damage, and for the link rope, energy regen is going to be the primary, and attack percentage would be a secondary rope that you're going to want. And we'll kind of explain why here with the energy regen rate, because the amount of energy she needs to ult is going to be a bit more than our standard users when it comes to the energy that she needs. So just be aware that her ultimate is a hefty amount of energy, so that's why that's going to be recommended there. For synergies and team comps, again, we don't have any MOC data. We don't have anything like that. So all of the theory crafting and team building comps are based off of the content creator server and beta tests. So if you are, the creme de la creme, pulling on all the banners, got a lot of 5 stars, the premium team, it's going to look like something like Aglaya, Sunday, Robin, and Ho-Oh, or maybe Trailblazer in the Remembrance Path as opposed to Robin. For maybe if you only have some of those 5 stars, you don't have all of them, maybe you just have Aglaya and Sunday, then you would substitute out Ho-Oh and Robin for Ting Yun and Gallagher. And to clarify, this is Ting Yun, not her 5-star form. And then if you don't have Sunday, because all these banners are coming back to back to back, and maybe you pulled for Herda, and maybe you pulled for somebody else, and then you knew you were pulling for Aglaya, right? So you don't have Sunday. You decided to skip him. Your budget team is going to look something like Aglaya, Remembrance, Trailblazer, Ting Yun, and Gallagher. So we'll be interested to see how her team comps and numbers look once we have that data from this first round of MOC. But Steve, I believe you pulled for her a little bit. So how did your pulls go for her? And then you can tell us if you actually got her and she came home, or if you have a similar who's going to be your Kaching of Star Rail.
Well, she did come home because going into it, I kind of went, you know what, I'm gonna shoot for her first erudition, her first Eidolon, sorry, her first Eidolon. Primarily
Really?
because the primary reason is she is very energy hungry, and the way that she plays requires that you keep her in her ultimate form pretty much continuously. And at 350 energy points, that's very difficult to do at E0. Not impossible, but it's definitely difficult. So it causes her gameplay to tend to be very... If you don't have Woho and Sunday, you tend to ramp up, then drop off, ramp up, then drop off, ramp up, and drop off. So I wanted the ease of use that comes from E1. She does have a minor damage buff, but the real reason why you go for it is because A, you don't then have to use the energy regen rope, you can switch to an attack rope, and you have a little bit more flexibility in your team. You don't have to be quite as rigid in what you're building. The long and the short of that is I made it to 3 5-star characters. I'm now the proud owner of a E4 Bailu and a Japard and an E0 Aglaya. I am 30 pools into the next, into my 50-50. And I'm thinking I'm going to wait until the end of this pack section, throw whatever I earn into it. If I get E1, that's great. If I don't, it's not the end of the world. Because I do have the majority of the team. I don't have Woe, but I do have Sunday, I do have Robin, I do have, Remembrance, Trailblazer, and she plays fine like that. But I will say that there is a little bit of micromanagement that can go into her when she is not in her max speed form, when she doesn't have her ult up, when her Memo Sprite doesn't have 6 stacks on it. You do feel it. So being able to stay at sort of high gear with that is nice. She is a little bit of a speed scaler as well. So, having her fast, you don't need to get her like ridiculously fast the same way that you do with, say, Sparkle or other characters. Like you don't need 160. But getting her into the like 140s is definitely noticeable as well. Trying to run her slower isn't bad, but she does get a lot of attack in her ultimate mode based off of speed. So, building her fast is good. But no, I've been enjoying her. She's a fun character, very beautiful, very well designed from a visual standpoint. Hits the remembrance path itch that I have. Pretty much every remembrance character that's going to be coming up, I'm going to be looking at them and going like, okay, I can get them eventually, right? Like I think I'm going to be like my account is going to be a remembrance account, or at least a pet account, just because that's the type of characters I like to play. So I'm enjoying her. I would say based off of the fact that she has such strict team requirements, if you don't have at least 2 of the characters on her premium team, I would maybe skip her. That there are probably better characters coming up that are a little bit more free-to-play friendly. I would not say that she is a free-to-play friendly character at this time. That could change in the future.
I will admit I am torn right now between, because I absolutely loved her design and her kind of introduction to the story, and then when I saw that she was coming, and then I saw that Robin's banner is also being rerun, as somebody who does not have Robin but is kind of building a very strong follow-up team, I'm torn because I know my resources are stretched kind of thin at the moment. I can potentially get 1, but probably not 2 unless I am the luckiest of lucky men, which I've not been lucky in my other gotchas, which we'll get into in just a moment. So I don't know what I'm going to do. So from your perspective, Steve, between pulling for Robin or pulling for Aglaia, who would you lean towards, knowing I do not have Sunday?
I would probably say Robin because she's such a universal support. And her attack buff is great. Her full team advance is great. I would say if you're looking for value for pull, Robin is probably your best option, especially because I believe you went for Adventurine, correct?
Yeah, I have Adventuring, yes.
Yeah. So at that point, you basically have the second best follow-up team, first best follow-up team, depending on what fight it is, set up for you. Robin is also going to be great in your Nihility team, giving you your dot team. You don't necessarily have to put her in there. You have Acheron, so you can do Acheron dot. But I think that gives you a lot of flexibility there. So I don't want to tell anyone what to do. That includes you, Dave.
I know.
Everybody
I know.
pull
I was just asking
what you want to pull
for your perspective.
But I would say if you are looking for value, I would go Robin. The other sort of caveat would be, I know next patch, I believe we know who's coming next patch, and the patch after is looking kind of interesting. So based off of future events, if you're on a guaranteed, I would say go for Robin. If you're not,
don't go for Robin.
Yeah, there might be other characters that you might want in the future, but Robin's the bird in the hand. So,
Well, I will take it into advisement. I will take it into consideration, sure. Because I'm sitting here going, man, am I really going to pull for Robin another support? My Bronya and my Sparkle that are all fully built on the account are currently crying because they've been outclassed by all these supports that are incoming. Still, and my poor Jing Liu too. Oh. Yeah. But anyway, there were some rumors about old characters getting buffed a little bit, so we'll keep you posted on what transpires from those rumors. But I believe
I would say those
addressed it vaguely, so we don't exactly know what it means. But as we learn more, we'll be sure to share updates with you guys. But moving outside of Hoyoverse, we do have some news in other games, some other updates and things this past week. So starting first with Girls Frontline 2, They just this past week had a new patch, so that means new event, new character dropped. So we got Dushevnaya is the new character that dropped. She is a freeze damage character, mostly physical element, but she can do freeze damage. She's a sniper rifle user, and based off of what we know from the Chinese server, which is about a year ahead of the global server, while not, if you're a meta chaser, she's not top tier by any means. She does hold a little more value in a freeze damage team, but even within the freeze damage team, not one that is the priority or the main staple of the team. But similar to what we said in between Robin and Aglaya, not going to tell you who to pull for, who not to pull for, just kind of giving you some insight if you weren't familiar from what we see in the Chinese server. Also, within Girls Frontline 2, this patch introduced a few quality of life updates and some other things worth mentioning. One of the big quality of life updates they added was the ability to open all in terms of your inventory. So I was surprised that we didn't see this on launch, considering this is just standard. Like I don't know why this wasn't, but it wasn't. So you would literally have to go through and open chests one at a time. Now you have the option to open all. So if you've been saving them up, so because you're lazy and don't want to click through them like me, which is perfectly reasonable, because why would they ask you to do that? You can go through in your inventory, select open all, and all the items will be out of the chest, which is great. Also with this patch, they introduced some new skins. Sabrina gets a new skin, as does Cheetah. Sabrina with a swimsuit, bathing suit themed skin, and Cheetah's skin similar but more of a racing theme, a race car theme kind of, I guess. So if you are somebody who spends money on those, they are purely cosmetic. There is no advantage to it in terms of combat, except for just things to look at. The other big one as well that was speculated, and we talked about it when we first heard about it, and that is the standard banner now has a targeted rate up. So basically what that means is you can choose on the standard banner a unit or a weapon that comes in the standard banner and have that be the focus, meaning there is a 50% chance that you will get your selected unit and a 50% chance that you'll quote unquote miss and get anything else in the standard banner. So basically imagine if your standard banner in Genshin, you could choose which 5-star weapon, or if you wanted, Deha or Kaching or Chi-Chi or, any of the other standard banner characters, you would pick them as the focus. And if you win, you would get them. And if you lose, you would get literally anybody else or anything else. So, so if you have been hoarding your polls, I had about 80 saved up. So for Girls Frontline 2, strongly advised if you didn't get QJ during the beginner banner poll or the rookie banner polls, she is a strong character. And when I say QJ, I do mean it's Kwangju, but commonly referred to as QJ, as you can see why, 'cause I probably didn't even pronounce her name right. But even in the Chinese server, she is still on top of the meta tier lists. In terms of whether it be just general content clearing or boss clearing, she is still the best in the Chinese server. So a strong unit to pull for, have be your focus if you didn't get her when the game launched. But that is Girls Frontline 2 news. Other news, Nika Goddess of Victory, they have part 2 of their Valentine Maid event going on. The other week they introduced Masked Masked Romantic Maid into the game, which is an alternate unit based off of the original Masked character from the game. This week we have her partner, Innocent Maid Anchor, who those two units will synergize very well together. And when I had mentioned my polls haven't been going well, in a game that has a 4% SSR rate, I have done 200 polls across both of these banners and hit 2 SSRs. So I am polling currently, if you can do the math, at a 1% rate. So about 25% of what I'm supposed to be getting. Though I will say I did hit both times, so that was fortunate. It's not like I lost the 50-50, but still, grumble, grumble, gripe, gripe. But anyway, that's what's going on with Nikke, so a new character there, and then part 2 of the Valentine maid event. If you're interested in joining, still some goodies to be had there. Lastly, man, really a lot of news in our waifu games this week. But yeah, Snowbreak has their ongoing event, but this past week they introduced a new character. Yao is the character name, is Yao Nightglow, and they actually give her away for free. So just for logging into the game, you can get a free SSR in Snowbreak. So be sure to log in. I think it's available for the next week or 2, maybe. So be sure to log in and get her for free and check her out with the event. But that's going to do it for us this week. We do want to thank you guys for joining us. Let us know maybe if you have any shocking takes on the Electro Element in Genshin. Sorry, I had to do it. Shout out to Sino for the dad jokes there, since we didn't talk about you today. If you enjoyed this episode, though, you'd like to show your support, be sure to like, follow, subscribe to the channel down below. You can always email us at brohoyopod@gmail.com if you have any questions or suggestions for the show. We also have the link down below to our Discord, so you can be sure to join us over there for news, game nights, or content notifications, or just general discussion. Be sure to join us next week. We'll be continuing our mini-series here on elemental teams in Genshin. Next week, we're going to dive into the usage rates and where they are now, key units, and builds for the Hydro element. But until then, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.